Ladies and gentlemen, what is going on? Today we are going over my running back week 3 rankings, who you should be starting, who you should be sitting. We're going to go over all of that in this video, starting it off with the Thursday night game, New York Giants against the San Francisco 49ers. Before we get into who to start and sit, if you guys are new to this channel or have clicked on a couple of my videos in the past and aren't already subscribed, please consider doing so. It would really help me out, and we are on the road to 2,000. Back to the action here. We are going to start it off with Matt Breida here. He is going against one of the toughest defense in the National Football League in the 49ers. This is also likely to just be a one-game starting role for Matt Breida. Saquon Barkley almost made an incredible comeback from that injury that he suffered late in the Arizona Cardinals game. He almost played on Thursday night. So unfortunately for Saquon fantasy owners, it's a short week. He didn't make it back in time, but expect him to play next week. I think it's really hard to expect Matt Breida to play well in this matchup, seeing he's barely had any carries this year so far. He's been backing up Saquon the whole time, hasn't really been seeing the field a lot. I don't think Breida was worth the pickup in waivers. I know some people went out and got him, but I just don't think that he's startable this week. As for Gary Brightwell, he's probably not going to see the field much in this matchup, so I'm not even going to go into depth on him. As for the 49ers, Christian McCaffrey, a must-start every single week, potentially the #1 running back in fantasy football. We're not going to go any further into that. And then as for Elijah Mitchell, he is a sit in my opinion. He hasn't seen any relevant work so far this season for the 49ers. Last year at the end, he had that big week in week 18 to finish off the season. Everybody's saying, oh, he might split carries with CMC this year. No, that's the farthest thing from the truth. He's barely getting any work. Actually, Shanahan spoke on the matter, and he said Mitchell is going to receive more playing time moving forward. He didn't even know that Mitchell didn't get in the game last week in week number 2. The plan for the 49ers was not to have McCaffrey getting all the snaps, but it's not a great sign when your head coach doesn't even know that you didn't make it on the field. All right, it's clear that they do not game plan to get around getting him enough touches right now for him to be fantasy relevant whatsoever. I mean, you could probably expect about 5 to 10 touches for Mitchell going forward, but it's nothing crazy, nothing startable just yet. Next game up here, we have the Colts versus the Ravens. Starting it off with the Indianapolis Colts, I am sitting Zach Moss. I am sitting Deion Jackson. As for the Baltimore side of things, I am sitting Justice Hill, and I am starting Gus Edwards. We'll talk about that in a minute, but all right, starting it off with Zach Moss. All right, I put him in my week 1 waiver wire video, which meant, I thought you should go pick him up in week number 1. I said he could be, or he should be, the starting running back as long as Jonathan Taylor is out of this offense before he comes back from the PUP list. That's exactly what happened. A lot of people called me crazy for saying to pick up Zach Moss, saying he wasn't going to do anything. Now, I don't think he's any amazing talent by any means. He faced the worst rushing defense last week in the Houston Texans, and he definitely made the most of it. All right, 20.7 PPR fantasy points. It was a great day for him, but I think he has everybody fooled right now. All right, last week was probably the highest total that Zach Moss is going to get. Could I be wrong? Could he put up a masterful 30-point performance this week? Sure, but do I think it's probable? No, I do not by any means. Baltimore has a good defense. I don't like the matchup. I think, like I said, Zach Moss has a lot of people fooled right now. I think the Colts are going to struggle in this matchup, especially if Anthony Richardson does not play because of that concussion. Also, I'm sitting Deion Jackson. He's not going to get much playing time after dropping a fat dud in week number 1, fumbling 2 times. I don't even know if he got a touch last week, so that clears things up for Deion Jackson. On the opposite side of the ball, Justice Hill. The reason that he is probably not starting this game is he has a toe injury from last week's game against Cincinnati. Even if he does play, the toe is more than likely going to affect his gameplay to some degree, so I don't love that. Since Dobbins is out for the year right now, it's going to mean that either Edwards or Hill is going to be thrust into that #1 role. They also did go out and sign Melvin Gordon and Kenyon Drake as backup plans to these 2 guys. I think Gus Edwards should be that #1 running back going forward, but you never know. All right, this could be a fully split backfield. This week especially, though, if Justice Hill doesn't end up playing, I think Gus Edwards is a solid play. All right, I'd take the risk on Gus Edwards, playing him as your flex or even your running back 2 in deeper leagues. Now, I wouldn't say he has been consistent in the past by any means, but he showed potential in the past to be explosive at certain times. Injuries have slowed down his career just like they have for so many other Ravens players. J.K. Dobbins comes to mind. All right, poor J.K. Dobbins. He gets hurt every single year. Gus Edwards, it's been the same type of thing. Hopefully that doesn't continue into this season. I think he's a sneaky play in week number 1. On to the Titans versus the Browns here. On the Tennessee side of things, we have starting Derrick Henry. I am starting Tajay Spears. We'll talk about that more in just a minute. On the Cleveland side of things, I am sitting Jerome Ford and I am sitting Kareem Hunt in this matchup. As for Derrick Henry, we're going to start right here. He is currently dealing with a toe injury from week number 2 against the Los Angeles Chargers. If he plays, there is no question in my mind you start Derrick Henry every day of the week. On to Tajay Spears, who I also have as a start this week. In deeper leagues, I would consider starting Spears because he's had enough touches to be fantasy relevant, especially last week. All right, 8 carries for 49 yards, which was extremely efficient. And then he caught 2 passes for 6 yards as well. If Henry is limited in this matchup, or if he has an injury designation going into this weekend, I would probably expect Spears to see the field a bit more. So in those deeper leagues, if you need a flex option, a streaming option, Tajay Spears, I would put him in your lineup and feel confident that he's at least going to produce serviceable numbers in week number 3 here. Onto the Cleveland side of things, Nick Chubb went down with that gruesome leg injury against the Steelers on Monday night. Prayers up for Nick Chubb. I really hope I see him play football again because that is the same knee that he injured. I believe it was in 2015. So it's not looking good for Nick Chubb at the moment, but we are definitely praying for the best. As for Jerome Ford, he was the number 1 waiver wire pickup of the week potentially. This matchup is horrendous. I made the mistake last week of saying that I thought Joshua Kelly was going to have a decent game against the Titans. I'm not making the same mistake here. All right, Tennessee has held the running backs through 2 weeks to 45 yards and 39 yards respectively. I don't think Jerome Ford is a start this week. I think you be patient on this guy and he pays off massively towards the end of the season, but just not right now. As for Kareem Hunt, Hunt might see more action as the weeks go by, but I'm really not interested in seeing what he has to offer in this matchup. Like I said, again, against a really tough run defense in Tennessee. Onto the Broncos versus the Dolphins here. All right, starting it off with Javonte Williams. He is currently dominating carries over Samaje Perine right now, while Perine is dominating the receiving work out of the backfield. What I want to see going forward, and especially in week 3 here, is for Williams' workload to increase, especially in the passing game. Also, Dolphins defense is currently ranking 28th against running backs this season. I think Javonte should be in your starting lineups here, as well as Samaje Perine in mostly deeper leagues. He runs more routes than Javonte Williams at the moment. This is a game where I could see the Dolphins pulling ahead early and the Broncos having to pass throughout this matchup. Whereas Samaje Perine might be on the field more than Javonte Williams in that situation. But either this game's close and Javonte gets more work, or, the Dolphins go up early and then Perine gets more work. So I think he could be a solid play, especially in those deeper PPR leagues for you. On the Miami side of things, Raheem Mostert as a start. Mostert surprised me against the Patriots, honestly. I didn't think he was going to be that effective. He looked much more efficient than I was expecting. He's a matchup-based running back, in my opinion, going forward. If you expect the Dolphins to be up early in games, then Mostert is a solid play. But you saw in week 1 against the Chargers, it was an absolute shootout the entire time, back and forth, back and forth. That's not the type of environment that Raheem Mostert is going to thrive in. So just keep that in mind going forward. Ahmed looked pretty good on Sunday night before he left with that injury. Mostert is really the only back I would start right now in fantasy football. And then for A-Chain, he's not really seeing enough work at the moment. The talent is certainly there, but he's just not getting the playing time yet to be fantasy relevant. Next up, we have the Falcons versus the Lions. Starting with the Atlanta Falcons, I am starting Bijan Robinson. I am sitting Tyler Algier, starting Jahmyr Gibbs, and sitting Craig Reynolds. First off, Bijan Robinson is a must-start every single week. I am not going to talk about this any further. He should be in your lineup every single time, no matter the opponent. Sitting Tyler Algier here. Now, Algier is a sit in this game because Bijan played nearly double his snaps in week number 2. With a guy like Algier, you're really banking on him finding the end zone. and I'm just not comfortable doing that in this matchup against the Lions. All right, on to the opposite side of the ball, we have Jahmyr Gibbs. I think it's a no-brainer decision to start Gibbs in every single format. With Montgomery almost a guarantee to be out this Sunday, he should have a much larger role in this offense. He has the explosiveness. He has the pass-catching potential to shine in the league. I think this is a huge week for Gibbs to prove that he deserves more playing time going forward. Last but not least in this matchup, we have Craig Reynolds. I think he might take some of Montgomery's carries in this matchup, but I find it hard to believe that he's going to provide any sort of relevant fantasy value, so I am sitting him. Next up, we have the Saints versus the Packers. I am sitting Kendry Miller on the Saints, sitting Tony Jones Jr., starting Aaron Jones if he plays, and sitting A.J. Dillon even if Aaron Jones does not play. First off, Kendry Miller, not sure exactly what to expect here, but if I had to guess, it's going to be that Miller and Tony Jones are going to split carries to some extent, while Jones is going to get the majority of the goal line work. So you're really betting on just a huge touchdown from Kendry Miller. Not worth it, in my opinion, here, even though the Packers don't have the best run defense in the league currently. As for Tony Jones Jr., not interested here simply because the Saints have looked super flat running the ball. Even though it was Jamal Williams in the first week, even this Monday night when Tony Jones scored those 2 touchdowns, it boosted his numbers dramatically. He wasn't averaging that many yards per carry, so I'm not going to count on the touchdowns carrying over against the Packers. As for the Packers, I am starting Aaron Jones if he is healthy. You got to have Jones in your lineup if he plays. He is the most explosive back in this offense, the best pass-catching back in this offense as well. As for A.J. Dillon, I am not confident in playing him, even if Aaron Jones does not play. All right, I'm sitting him because he looked flat the first 2 weeks. And last week, when Aaron Jones didn't even play, he didn't do anything with it. All right, he didn't do anything with the starting job, scoring 7.3 PPR fantasy points. And then in week 1, he scored 5.6 PPR fantasy points, averaged just 1.5 yards per carry. That's not serviceable. I am not taking the risk here in week 3. Next up, we have the Chargers versus the Vikings. On the Chargers side of things, Austin Eckler might not play. If he plays, he is a must start all day, every day of the week. Joshua Kelly is a start for me. Elijah Dotson is a sit. For the Minnesota side of things, Alexander Mattison is a start. Cam Akers is a sit. Ty Chandler is a sit as well. As for Austin Eckler, we just talked about it. He's a must start if he does play. Joshua Kelly on the opposite side of things. If Eckler doesn't play, this is when I'd be starting him. This is a great matchup against a Vikings team who just gave up 175 yards on the ground to DeAndre Swift and the Eagles on Thursday night. Kelly struggled last week against the Tennessee Titans, having one of the best run defenses in the league. I'm not holding it against him here. I would give him one more chance, at least. As for Elijah Dotson, he's not going to be used enough in this offense to be fantasy relevant, so I am sitting him. Alexander Mattison on the opposite side of the ball, we are starting him. Brutal news for him and his fantasy owners as well. The fact that Cam Akers got traded to the Minnesota Vikings. He should play well this week, though, against a poor Chargers defense who can't stop anybody. But going forward, I have a lot of question marks about this situation here with Cam Akers being involved. As for this week goes, I'm sitting Cam Akers in this matchup. I don't think he's going to be used to the offense by then. I don't think he's going to be used enough in this matchup to be fantasy relevant. And I think it's going to take a couple weeks to adjust and finally get him really involved fully in this offense. Last but not least, Ty Chandler. I am sitting him as well. He's not going to see nearly enough playing time with the mix of Akers and Madison ahead of him. Moving on to the Patriots against the New York Jets. We are starting Ramondre Stevenson, sitting Ezekiel Elliott, starting Breece Hall, and sitting Dalvin Cook. Ramondre Stevenson, I would always start Ramondre based on his pass-catching value alone. Also, when he has a good matchup, he is very efficient as a runner. He salvaged his week 1 performance against the Philadelphia Eagles. They have a brutal defensive line to go against. All right, he salvaged his day simply due to his catching ability in that matchup. I love him going forward into the rest of this season. This Jets defense, by the way, is not the same as it has been in the past, and it's on the field for way too much for them to slow down Stevenson for the entire game. As for Ezekiel Elliott, I am not starting him this week. You're really banking on Zeke getting that goal line work. That just may not come. All right, within the 5-yard line, you're hoping that Zeke gets that carry and finds the end zone. I can't be banking on that every single week, so he's not playable in my opinion. Breece Hall, this one could be interesting. All right, I was kind of up in the air on if I should start him this week, sit him. He had a brutal matchup last week, and the Jets offense as a whole barely was on the field compared to the Cowboys. I think the Cowboys almost doubled their offensive snaps as New York Jets in that game. All right, Breece only played on 15 snaps, which was the same as Michael Carter. For some reason, they're using Michael Carter, Breece Hall, and Dalvin Cook right now, which I don't really understand. But Breece Hall is, in my eyes, the best running back on this team. I don't even think it's close. He has a much better matchup this week against the Patriots than last. I think the Cowboys are a much tougher defense. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, and we're going to start him in this game. As for Dalvin Cook, I am sitting him. I don't really see him magically emerging as the number 1 running back in New York anytime soon, so I'm out on Dalvin Cook at the moment. Next up, we have the Bills against the Commanders. I am starting James Cook, sitting Latavius Murray, sitting Damian Harris, starting Brian Robinson Jr. on the Commanders, and sitting Antonio Gibson. As for James Cook goes, I think you have to start him after putting up great numbers last week, 123 yards on 17 carries, which is exactly what you should see out of a running back going against the Las Vegas Raiders. Tougher matchup this week against the Commanders. We need him to keep catching passes if he struggles on the ground in this game. That's all I am looking for out of James Cook here. Now, one thing I am a little bit concerned about with James Cook, and it definitely eats into his fantasy value a good amount, is that he doesn't see nearly any goal line work in this offense. That leads us into our next option here. Latavius Murray is a sit. I don't think he gets enough playing time in this offense, and he needs that goal line work. You are banking on the touchdowns, very similar to an Ezekiel Elliott type of situation. He scored last week, but it was a blowout win for the Bills. All right, I wouldn't count on that happening every single time. And then Damian Harris also does not get enough work to be fantasy relevant at the moment. Brian Robinson Jr. for the Commanders. There's no reason I would be sitting Brian Robinson Jr. this week after we're watching him get more and more work in the passing game every week. And of course, he's dominating the carries over Antonio Gibson. This is not the best matchup, in my opinion, but his workload is going to guarantee a pretty high floor, especially at the running back position, which is few and far between heading up to this point in the year. As for Antonio Gibson, he is a sit. He's done nothing this year so far. Every year, it's the same story about Antonio Gibson. We're going to use him like Christian McCaffrey, blah, blah, blah. It never goes to plan. I'm never going to learn. I keep drafting this guy. He's sitting on my bench. He'll continue sitting on my bench. All right, I'm telling you. Antonio Gibson, what are we doing, man? Brian Robinson, it's his job all day right now. So start B-Rob and sit Gibson. Houston Texans against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I am sitting Dameon Pierce. I am sitting Devin Singletary. On the Jaguars side of things, I am starting Travis Etienne, and I am sitting Tank Bigsby. Dameon Pierce, not really much to say here. The offensive line has looked terrible. He has been very inefficient thus far. I do not trust him heading into this game. He had 38 yards in week number 1 and 31 yards in week number 2. It is not looking good at all in Houston. Okay, as for Devin Singletary goes, this is a similar situation. I don't think anybody in this backfield should be started right now. Pierce is clearly getting much more work than Singletary, but he's not doing a damn thing about it. He's not doing anything with that opportunity at the moment, and I don't think it's completely his fault. Like I said, the offensive line looks horrible right now. Opposite side of the ball, Travis Etienne. He struggled in week number 2, but I think he gets back on track here. He's going against one of the easiest rushing defenses in the entire NFL. He saw 48 out of a possible 66 snaps on offense last week. He's clearly still the number 1 running back here, has a stranglehold on that running back room in Jacksonville. I would not be panicking on Travis Etienne just yet. Definitely a must start this week for me. Sitting Tank Bigsby, this is another situation where he does not get enough work out of this backfield to be fantasy relevant just yet. Next, we're going to head to the Panthers and Seahawks game. All right, I'm sitting Miles Sanders. I am sitting Chuba Hubbard. I am starting Kenneth Walker, and I am sitting Zach Charbonnet in this matchup. As for Miles Sanders goes, listen, I've really never been a big fan of Miles Sanders. I said it all offseason, and I said it last season. Philly's offensive line, the Eagles' offensive line made him look a lot better than he was. I think he snagged a huge contract that he it wasn't really all him. All right. It was a lot of the offensive line in Philadelphia. And you saw it last week with DeAndre Swift. They made him look like an absolute superstar. Not saying Swift isn't a very talented player, but when you're running behind one of the best, if not the best offensive line in football, it makes you look a lot better than you actually are. Okay. Sanders gets the majority of the workload in Carolina. I don't think it really matters, especially because he's averaging less than 4 yards per carry right now. His receptions out of the backfield, though, have saved him so far up to this season. That leads us to Chuba Hubbard, who is getting more receiving work, which I like to see. He played well last week, but a lot of it was in garbage time against the New Orleans Saints on Monday night, so I don't really trust him yet to play him. Opposite side of the ball, we have Kenneth Walker. I think he is a must start this week. He's still the number one back in Seattle right now. 2 touchdowns last week. He's getting all the goal line work, which you love to see. He's still seeing a good amount of receiving work as well. I think he has a good week against the Panthers here. As for Zach Charbonnet goes, I think you need to be patient with this guy. He saw more work last game. I think that gradually increases week after week. If anything ever happens to Kenneth Walker, if he misses a game, Charbonnet is a must start in my opinion, but not in week 3. Next up, Bears against the Chiefs. I am sitting Khalil Herbert, sitting Roschon Johnson. We're going to talk about that more in a second, though. Little asterisk on that one. Starting Isaiah Pacheco and sitting Jerick McKinnon in this matchup. First off, Khalil Herbert, he has been just all right so far this year, but we know Kansas City has a run defense that is above average, especially with Chris Jones being back in the lineup. They proved that last week against the Jags. They had Etienne held to a miserable performance for his standards, and Etienne is much better of a running back than Khalil Herbert, so I'd be a little cautious about starting Herbert this week. As for Roschon Johnson goes, I wouldn't mind starting him in very deep leagues, but in normal, 10, 8, even 12 maybe, I probably wouldn't be starting Roschon Johnson. He could be the starter later on this year, all right? He's been very efficient so far in this season. I think, like I said, he could have a great chance to become the number 1 back in Chicago in a couple weeks here. I think it's just a little bit early to be playing him, though, in your normal 10, 12 person leagues at the moment. Next up, Isaiah Pacheco. He played a little bit better in week number 2, averaging 5.8 yards per carry against the Jaguars. What I don't like about Pacheco in this whole situation is this is really a 3-headed backfield at the moment with Pacheco, McKinnon, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I don't know why they keep bringing him back. I really don't. I mean, he just eats into the touches and doesn't really do much with it. I don't know. Might be a little biased towards Pacheco. I want to see Pacheco succeed, and it's just not going to be possible with McKinnon and Helaire getting so many snaps. All right, not good for his fantasy value at all. Also, something to keep in mind is that Pacheco has a hamstring injury and is considered day-to-day. If he's fully cleared by this weekend, I feel comfortable starting him because the Bears do not have a good rushing defense at all. As for Jerick McKinnon, he's not currently getting enough usage to be, startable at the moment unless he breaks a long playoff. I would definitely consider playing him, though, if Pacheco misses this game. I would probably be inclined to say start Jerick McKinnon if Pacheco misses this game. Next up, we have the Cowboys and the Cardinals. For the Dallas Cowboys, I am starting Tony Pollard. I am sitting Rico Dowdle. I am sitting James Conner, and I am sitting Keontae Ingram. Tony Pollard is a must start every single week. No further information is required here in this situation. As for Rico Dowdle, Pollard is the man here 100% of the time. He's not going to see the field enough to be fantasy relevant at all. James Conner, this is an insanely tough matchup that limited Jets running backs to just 24 total yards last week, excluding Zach Wilson. All right, he had a good amount of rushing yards himself, but the running backs were insanely limited. There was no room to run for them. Normally, Connor's workload would probably provide him enough value to be fantasy relevant, but I don't think it's worth trusting against a Cowboys defense that looks great so far this year. Keontae Ingram, after that, sitting him as well. He's not really relevant when Connor is playing about 90 to 95% of the snaps on this offense. Steelers against the Raiders. Najee Harris, I am starting him. This is the last chance I'm giving Najee, by the way. Jaylen Warren, I am also starting him. Las Vegas, Josh Jacobs I am starting, and then Zamir White I am sitting. As for Najee Harris, like I said, this is it. This is the last chance, and then I'm done with Najee. If he has a bad week against one of the worst rushing defenses in the league right now, then we got bigger problems. All right, this might be Jaylen Warren's, come up if Najee struggles in this one. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, though. He had 2 tough matchups so far, San Francisco and Cleveland. All right, but Warren has outperformed him so far this season. He's been much more efficient. We need to see a bounce back game here. If not, we're in trouble. As for Jaylen Warren goes, his pass catching potential makes him startable in this matchup, in my opinion. Tomlin likes him and is definitely showing he's playing almost as many snaps as Najee Harris, and that could definitely continue to rise as the weeks go on. On the opposite side of the ball, Josh Jacobs. We need to really let Josh Jacobs get back into his groove, I think. All right. He saved his week last week with the pass catching ability against the Buffalo Bills. If not, it would have been a horrendous performance. People would be extremely panicked on him, and I think for decent reason. He sat out the preseason. He sat out in training camp. All right, you got to give this guy a little bit more time to break back into what he had going on last season. As for Zamir White, not even going to get enough playing time to be relevant. This is Josh Jacobs' job 100%. On to the Eagles versus the Buccaneers on Monday night. For Philadelphia, I am starting DeAndre Swift, sitting Kenneth Gainwell. On Tampa Bay, I am sitting Rachaad White and sitting Sean Tucker in this matchup. As for DeAndre Swift goes, I am really on the fence about this one, okay? But I'm leaning towards starting him slightly more than sitting him. I think he is definitely the guy that you want in this backfield, and I think Philly will realize that sooner or later that he's the more talented back, even though they love Kenneth Gainwell. We all know this. You have to monitor what they do this week with Gainwell, all right? If they split evenly, I would be surprised if it's not skewed a little bit more towards Swift in this matchup than a full split or even Gainwell getting more carries. Not the best matchup. Tampa Bay has a tough run defense, but you're talking about Philly's #1 offensive line going against Tampa's, good, solid run defense. I think Philly's offensive line wears them down as the game goes on, and they break a couple big runs later on in this matchup. As for Kenneth Gainwell, with Swift having a massive week last Thursday against Minnesota, I think it's very hard to imagine that he doesn't see more touches in this game going forward. I wouldn't be confident starting Kenneth Gainwell until we have further clarification on the running back split here in Philly. As for the Tampa Bay side of things, Rachaad White, I have him as a sit. I think he's a start if you absolutely have no other options on your team. Philly's defense has been an absolute nightmare for Ramondre Stevenson so far, who is a good running back, and then Alexander Mattison in the last 2 weeks leading up to this matchup. White is clearly a very talented player, but unless he saves his week with passing work, just like Ramondre did in week #1, I am not comfortable starting him against this defensive line. Sean Tucker, by the way, is a sit. Rachaad White is just dominating touches in this offense right now. I don't think Tucker is rosterable at this moment in time. And the last game of the week, the Rams against the Bengals. I am starting Kyren Williams, sitting Ronnie Rivers, starting Joe Mixon, and sitting Travion Williams. Okay, Kyren Williams, first of all, this is Kyren Williams' backfield for the year right now since they got rid of Cam Akers. That opens up crazy potential, which we've seen, especially last week. He played on 76 out of a possible 80 offensive snaps. I talked about that in the last video. Mind-blowing usage, and getting 10 targets out of the backfield is crazy. He needs to be in every starting lineup going forward just to see what he can do on a weekly basis. You got to have him there for that upside potential. Ronnie Rivers, not going to get too many carries or touches in this offense. I am sitting him. Joe Mixon, starting Joe Mixon. I think this is Joe Mixon's backfield. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. No competition here. He's performed all right through 2 weeks, scoring 10.3 and 13.5 PPR fantasy points. Not great numbers for Mixon, but he will have better weeks going forward. I think you have to start him almost every single week as your running back 2, ideally, simply based on the volume that he gets. Last but not least, I'm sitting Travion Williams. Like I said, Joe Mixon's backfield 100% of the time, or 95 to 100% of the time, whatever the case may be. He's not startable in fantasy. Anyways, guys, if you enjoyed this video, drop a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you are new, comment any questions, concerns down below, trade talks, whatever. I'm down to answer anything. Anyways, guys, I'll catch you in the next one, and good luck in week number 3. Peace.